Good afternoon, and we are back. We had just had a very interesting discussion on the gas crisis, and now we are switching to a more regional focused discussion, talking about the Nordics. Sweden is leading in heat pump deployment. Finland has set the world's most ambitious climate target in law, and Norway is a global leader in e-mobility. As we just saw in the intro graphic, the Nordic countries are consistently ahead when it comes to electric vehicle sales and share of renewables in the power mix. In this session, we ask how they are so far ahead, what got them here, what are policymakers and companies doing right, and how can other markets learn from their successes? In this discussion, to answer those big questions, we have Jacob Dalton, who is on a mission to maximize the value of flexibility and bring down users' energy costs by empowering them to play an active role in the energy transition. He does this as head of trading and home energy management at Tibber, a digital electricity supplier active in Norway, Sweden, Germany, and the Netherlands, currently serving 500,000 households. Their goal is to empower 10 million European households to consume energy smarter by 2025. Tibber offers wholesale spot prices to customers with a zero profit margin model, delivering smart charging and smart heating to customers, along with grid services to both TSOs and DSOs. Thank you for joining us today, Jacob.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Alongside Jacob, we have Kristine Fiksen, an experienced senior consultant with a demonstrated history of working in the management consulting industry. She has strong consulting professional skills in energy, renewable energy, energy policy, market analysis, and strategy. She is currently a partner at THEMA Consulting, which provides expert analysis and advice on issues related to the power sector and the transition to a sustainable society, based in Oslo. Welcome, Kristine.
Thanks, nice to be here.
We also have Asmund Moll Frengstad, current Chief Commercial Officer, founder, and former student at Norwegian University of Life Science, where he earned a master's in mechanical engineering. He founded Current Eco AS, formerly known as Meshcrafts, in 2013, and it's a market-leading EV charging platform. Current's cloud-based platform provides a comprehensive management system for charging points, complete with customizable functionality, dedicated tools for operations, network, energy, and billing management, and a white label app for end users. Welcome, Asmund.
Thank you very much.
We also have, this is a big panel today, so we have Markku Kivisto, who works in investment and business development for sustainable solutions that combat climate change. He focuses on zero carbon energy production, battery value chain, hydrogen, and sustainable manufacturing. He is head of industry Cleantech at Business Finland, where he has active hands-on involvement in the development of European industrial value chains, supporting Green Deal in batteries and hydrogen. Business Finland is the Finnish government organization that offers Finnish companies a unified customer journey for innovation activities, internationalization, investments, and tourism promotion. Welcome, Markku.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Great. We also have Olivia Nestius, who is the Chief Business Development Officer at Svea Solar's strategy development. And she is responsible for their strategy development, fundraising processes, M&A activities, business planning, and other more operationally focused efforts, all aimed at developing the young and fast-growing company in a booming solar industry. She is an experienced strategy consultant, having worked close to 6 years with McKinsey & Company in Europe and the US, focusing on private equity, renewables, strategy, and transformation work. Thank you, Olivia. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Okay, so we've got a lot to cover today. Let's dive straight into the questions. This is an open question, but I might direct it first up to Kristine. Why are the Nordic countries so far ahead when it comes to renewables, e-mobility, and climate targets? Is it policy, geography, luck, or something else?
Well, I would say it's a good combination of at least the three top areas you're mentioning. Of course, it's luck that we in Norway has this hydro reservoirs and a lot of possibilities to use a lot of hydro electricity, of course. But how we have managed it and developed it is of course, based on politics and the development of it. And also, when it comes to e-mobility, I think that having a almost 100% renewable power system to begin with, we would, to reduce emissions in Norway, we would sort of look for and start decarbonizing the more difficult areas like e-mobility, since almost all other countries, they would start with the power system. So I think that's sort of why we started decarbonizing private cars so early as we could. And of course, the abundance of electricity was a great help for that.
Mm-hmm. Markku, what's your perspective from the Finnish energy landscape?
Well, I think our starting point is very much because Finland, we have a very harsh climate. And compared to many other countries, we have no fossil fuels. So we have been no coal, no gas, no oil. So from the get-go, we have been kind of forced to, just for the survival, to figure out the ways of surviving here in the Nordics. And so our energy system is very diverse. It's like Kristine mentioned, so abundant amount of hydro. We also rely on the nuclear. There's biomass. Now increasingly then wind power is growing. So this is kind of like our base of kind of renewables, zero CO2 is kind of, it's something that we have been kind of building for a long time. And then another one is that this kind of the circular economy is very strong here. Then another one is also that this climate change. I think that all of the Nordic countries, we are seeing the impact of the climate change. So this is something that we feel that is also important. And I think another one is that we also see that this is an opportunity to bring some of the Nordic technologies also for the rest of the world and help them, let's say, abate the CO2 emissions. And when we do this together, it actually creates, let's say, the prosperity for everybody. And that's also another angle that we see this as a possibility to do this together with the Nordics for the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. And Asmund, what can we learn from Norway's support and subsidy policy for electric cars?
So a lot, and something is not applicable at all. So many people think that we are using the sovereignty fund to spike the energy and EVs. But in fact, that is that Norway is putting so heavily taxes on ICE cars that it's so expensive to buy a car, but for the electric car, there's no extra tax. So that means the price comparisons between an ICE car and an electric car has been there from the start. And if you combine that with enough capacity in the grid, which is usually the problem going down in Europe, then you have a system where we could actually handle the amount of EVs. And we had a price where it was affordable for everybody to acquire it. And then it's quite simple because you reduce your fuel bill by 90% to go to an EV. And even though many in Norway claim they are buying an EV for the environment, let's face it, you do it because of your wallet. And creating a system where it's actually economically benefit for you to be environmentally friendly while still driving a car is the key to success. So, and that success was started by AHA and Bellona back in the 90s in Norway, where they bought the first electric car in Norway and just drove it through toll roads and say, we're not polluting, so we're not paying a toll. And they actually managed to enforce the government to give all these benefits for the EV that we have been keeping until now. And now we're facing off all the subsidiaries and benefits because now the EV is really competing against the ICE car and doing better. I think last month, 97.5% of all new cars sold in Norway was pure battery electric vehicles. And I think that is the way to solve it. But there are some fundamental challenges, especially towards the grid, that needs to be fixed in many countries to do so.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Asmund. And Kristine, from a Norwegian perspective, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I of course agree with Asmund on the success of the EV or e-mobility in Norway, and yeah, I think it was a lot of countries they would have to sort of subsidize or bring money to the table to make EVs more competitive, and of course that's what we have done in Norway as well. But I think politically it's difficult, but it's still easier to sort of remove a levy than to hand out money in that respect. And I think, well, we still have far to go in Norway, and there are still a lot of these subsidies. So currently there are 19% of EVs out of the total amounts of personal cars in Norway. So there's still a long way to go. And more to do, but as of now, they are getting more compatible on their own hands, so to speak. So from here, it's easier than it has been up until now.
And Olivia, Sweden consistently has the highest percentage of renewables in the EU and ambitious emissions reductions goals. How important have carbon and energy taxes been in enabling this? Are there other important factors?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's been super important, and there are other factors as well. So please, let me elaborate a bit on that. So first of all, Sweden and also the rest of the Nordics have been quite fast in reacting to the early warnings about climate change. And we also tightened and strengthened our energy efficiency policies and also aid to help consumers, industries, and more actors to adapt to this new reality that we are facing. So we have been incentivizing and requiring also energy efficiency measures and incentivizing the use of renewable energy, and doing that through, for example, carbon taxes, energy taxes, and so on. So today we have over 50% of our energy supplies coming from renewable sources. So that is pretty cool, but we of course want to increase it closer to 100%. So we have seen carbon taxes, energy taxes, super important in terms of shifting demand, shifting behaviors towards using renewable energy sources. And one additional factor is the introduction of the green certificate system. That is also something that is promoting the use of renewable energy and renewable electricity. And this is something that Sweden and Norway are collaborating on. So this is a joint market that we're working in. So there are several different drivers, and of course, cost is a super important driver in increasing the share of renewable energy. So with the carbon tax, you make fossil-based energy more expensive, and therefore also putting renewable energy in a more competitive position. So we are seeing that wind and solar, the two cheapest electricity sources, and therefore it's also the fastest growing sources. So anything that can be done to increase the competitiveness of these sources is good. And one thing that Sweden and also the rest of Nordics have been doing great, in addition to reacting early, is also to reacting long term. So we're thinking about innovation on a longer term and not making too fast of changes that is disrupting the market. So we are also building a trust among companies, startups, investors, consumers, so that we dare to build businesses, we dare to invest in these businesses, and we have a trust in the system that the market will keep and be viable for many years to come.
Thanks, Olivia. And Jacob, we've talked a lot about, what has made the Nordics successful, but what can other countries learn from the successes of Nordic countries?
Yes, it's definitely a glimpse into the future for some other countries, I would say. One of the biggest learnings, I guess, on a high level is that the technical challenges can, in fact, be overcome. Other countries can move beyond the conversation that's talking about the potential of new technologies and the potential of distributed energy resources, etc. These technologies are implemented, and they're business models that are already functioning in the Nordics and bringing value for society today. If we look, for example, at the case of using electric vehicles as an asset for balancing the grid, Asmund mentioned that can be a challenge. In the Nordics, we're proving that these can actually be assets. And therefore, the conversation should move beyond the need for demonstration projects and proof of concepts. So talking in terms of technology readiness level, we're at the top, we're at level 9. The conversation should not be about the potential and if they can be assets. It should be when and how much, and we should be moving to scale these out throughout Europe. So essentially they can leapfrog and learn a lot from our pain and processes of implementing and getting these out into a commercial scale. The pilots are a thing of the past. This is happening here and now.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. Thanks, Jacob. And now looking at Finland again, Markku, Finland's updated Climate Change Act stipulates that the country will reduce emissions by 60% by 2030 from a 1990 baseline and reach net zero by 2035. This is one of the most ambitious climate targets in the developed world. How will this be reached, and what role does sustainable investment play?
A big thanks for the question. First, we need to be kind of humble that even though we would kind of cut the Finnish emissions to the zero, it would not save the world. We are kind of fraction of a percentage of the world emissions, but I think that together with the Nordic countries, we have then the know-how and kind of the help that we can then provide more broadly. But coming back to your question, that I think there are a couple of things. One is that it's about the part of the corporate or the company country policy. We have the energy climate strategy. That what we are executing, and that's like the colleagues mentioned, it's for the long term what we do here in the Nordics. Another one is that it's important that we get industries embracing, and that's something what's been done here. Again, public documents, they are available, is the 13 different industries. They have built these zero carbon roadmaps so that are then supporting this overall agenda, and that's then obviously something what we are following up. And then I like very much what Jacob mentioned, that now we need to build the scale, we need to have the speed. And there, one of the things is that currently, for example, wind power industry is growing very, very fast here in Finland. We are getting about 1 nuclear power plant worth of capacity on annual basis of new wind power capacity. And I just checked with our TSO. So they have about over 200 gigawatt of requests for new connections for the renewable power. So that's something that is kind of, and everything is done on a commercial basis. So that's what we are doing in Finland. But I'd like to also highlight the cooperation we do with the Nordics. We have a common grid. We have also now, for example, there's a cable connection now being built between Finland and Sweden. We have an ambitious plan together, build a hydrogen pipeline between the countries along the Bothnia Bay. So that is then kind of, in that way, we are able to capture then some of the let's say, the renewable energy. And then it provides the storage. It then also enables then the industries along the gas pipeline. So, and all these we are doing together then with the Nordic colleagues. So those are some of the, let's say, examples, just to name a few.
Thanks, Markku. We've actually had a question from the audience. I'm not sure if it's anyone's particular area of expertise, but we'll give it a go. Orland asked, he said the Nordics are very far ahead when it comes to carbon avoidance, clean energy, electric heating, electric mobility. Carbon capture and storage will play a crucial role in the future. Are the Nordics leading here as well? Would anyone like to jump in on that question?
I'll try at least. I know there is a lot of projects going on in Norway where this is really being tackled by the big industry. I read today that Elkem is doing totally rebuilding their system to create a substance that you need to create iron. And there is a company that is now refining materials for batteries and start a plant in Norway where they think they would reduce the actual emission by 90% with their new technology. So on the pilot things, yes, I do believe we are forerunners there as well, but pilot is one thing, actually building and scaling it up, only time will tell.
Thanks, Asmund. And when we talk about actually doing it, scaling it up. Kristine, who is and who should take the lead? Governments, companies, individuals, or is it a collective effort?
I think definitely that we all companies and private persons, we all need to be sort of willing and eager to do the right thing. But on the other hand, I think that the government should sort of set the direction and take the lead, because all of these changes, they need a common platform. And we need to make sure, like, sort of what are the system effects of doing these changes, and the system as a whole will need to sort of work. So I definitely think that government would set the strategy and make the systems and the incentives and the levies and the taxes and the infrastructure that's needed to actually get somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
What else we can do? A lot of small mistakes, each and one of us, but that won't take us far enough, quick enough.
Absolutely. And when we're looking at companies and scaling their solutions, and also, you know, particularly in a pan-European energy solution environment, Jacob, what are some of the major challenges of taking a solution from the Nordics to other countries, and how can regulation and/or innovation kind of catch up in these other countries?
Yeah, I can touch on also something that Asmund mentioned, that green shouldn't have a premium. Green shouldn't be an expensive choice. It should be the cheaper choice. And that's not always the case moving pan-European, I would say. But yeah, definitely in terms of barriers are, for example, a lack of standards. And that's looping back to what was just mentioned, that is the classic saying that we have 14 standards. We need to have one standard. You end up with 15 standards. So in the end, it needs to be the regulator, therefore the government bodies, the centralized bodies, who puts their foot down and just makes standards in specific cases. But yeah, in terms of scaling, it's an incredibly complex landscape with different technical standards and various markets. So there are those challenges, but also from our perspective, since we integrate to many different devices in the home, and we have a consumer perspective, and we have an open strategy, the fact of closed APIs, for example, is a big challenge. There are many parties who see the value here and are looking to be competitive and keeping closed architecture and a closed strategy, which in the end society loses because the transformation is slower. But it will happen. Everything will open up eventually. It's just unfortunate that we have to go through this process like banking did, like every other industry did, that everyone thought that, yeah, we can keep a large chunk of the pie and be closed. Then finally, yeah, transparency in terms of, I think we need to develop business models where it is win-win-win between the service provider, the equipment manufacturers, and then also the households, and therefore there is no need to stay closed, and we can actually find ways to accelerate that way.
Thanks, Jacob. And Olivia, what's your perspective on this?
I fully agree on Jacob's perspectives here. I mean, it's definitely a challenge, and that support and subsidy schemes and regulations and so on looks different in different countries. And sometimes it's also planned short term, which makes it difficult and even impossible to build business models that holds for a longer time period, and also holds in several countries. So it would be good if there are, for example, EU programs, EU regulations on this that is supporting similar business models to work in different countries, and that we can create the trust, build a trust from, so that consumers dare to tap into the business models, and the investors that they want to invest in these technologies and these models as well. So it's really important to be able to plan on a longer term. And also, I mean, speaking about investors, one challenge for companies from the Nordics might be that investors would be focusing on larger markets, a larger energy market like Germany, like the UK, Italy, Spain, and so on. But at the same time, we have the reputation of being tech savvy in the Nordics, having many sustained tech startups, scale ups, etc. So And we also have a large share of renewables and know how to build these types of solutions. So we also notice a lot of attraction from global investors, and that's great to see.
Mm-hmm. Asmund, would you add anything there of the e-mobility landscape, of kind of the importance of interoperability and also regulation that incentivizes innovation?
Yeah, so definitely. So for example, one of the big megatrends we're seeing now is how can we use the EV as an asset to enforce the grid and help stabilize it. And the current regulation is based on old school way of operating the grid. Thus, the EV are not allowed to participate in certain markets, so we can't use that asset. So we need the regulatory body to speed up the process so we can actually deploy the EV to reinforce the grid instead of being a load to the grid. That's one thing. And of course, in our ideal world, everything would be open and we would create win-win situations. But it's hard because everybody is looking at the bottom line and they want their numbers to be as high as possible. And finding a solution where we actually can work together is quite challenging. So that is one of the, I would say, major challenges on the short term. And I'm definitely sure we're gonna solve this because we have to. But that is where the shoe is pressing, at least from my point of view right now. And then standardization, all for it. But it needs to be a standardization that is actually working and not what one or two big companies would like to have because they would have some proprietary technology that they are controlling. So these are the major issues, I would say.
Yeah, thanks, Asmund. And you highlighted there the importance of working together, which I fully agree with. Markku, you mentioned before the importance of Nordic countries all working together and supporting each other. On a wider scale as well, how can we ensure that not only countries support each other, but regions and local areas as well, to kind of foster more collaboration?
Well, that's a good question. I think also that one thing is that it's like a team building. So that first we need to kind of agree with everybody that what's the game we play, and now we are kind of playing the saving the world game, and that's kind of the global game, and that's something what we kind of embrace, that the people in regions, nations actually join into, and then we can contribute every one of them, one of us into that, let's say solving the issues. And I'm actually here in, let's say, rural sites in Finland currently, and we have here hydrogen seminar. And we are collecting here the different regions across the Finland, but we also have, for example, participants from Sweden. Again, kind of, it's not only kind of Finnish agenda, again, the Sweden. And then in the late January, we'll be taking the team from here actually to Luleå, again, kind of building the collaboration. So this is again that we kind of mobilize the teams, mobilize the, let's say, the companies, and in that way also that to develop the policies. And that's the approach. And a little bit on this kind of the Nordic cooperation, it goes way back into the, let's say, mobile era. That was the time we built the joint standards. We then drove those together towards the Nordics. We have had the common labor market. We have a common grid. So these are kind of like it's a good testing market also for this kind of cross-border cooperation. And those are some examples that I think that all of us are willing to share and contribute also for the broader European, let's say, arena.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Markku. We've had a question from the audience asking, are traditional energy providers in the Nordics faster in adopting new digital business models, or does the energy transition rely on businesses like Current and Tibber? Maybe Jacob, do you want to start with that?
I have to be careful here. It's a loaded question. Faster compared to mainland Europe, I presume the answer is yes. And that is also because of new entrants like Tibber and other smart home providers or digital entrants. And there are also a number of B2B players or previously competitors to Tibber who have pivoted to a B2B positioning and offering their services that are now enabling other energy suppliers to go digital. So I think, a bit of both. And they've definitely had a shake-up because of players like us, but that's a positive thing in the end, and the rest of Europe is learning from it.
Asmund, would you have anything to add?
So I try to work with a couple of DSOs and TSOs and utilities across Europe. I would definitely say that the Nordics are a bit faster, not better, just faster. And big energy is still big energy. You have your PhD people still there, having their regulation, having their ways to say it. An engineer is still an engineer, so they will always act the same. But I do believe with the digitalization of energy, and especially the Nordics, yes, we probably are a bit faster. But once the smart meter is rolled out in Europe, the regulation is in place, I don't see why a German Stadtwerk should be any slower than a Norwegian one.
True. Thanks. And continuing on this kind of line of thought, Olivia, I find it really incredible that Sweden has such a high adoption of solar and prosumer households, particularly given the big differences between seasons in the Nordics. Surely if you can do it in Sweden and deal with that intermittency, seasonality, then we can do that anywhere else. Would you agree with that? Or
yeah, I definitely agree on that. And I was actually thinking of bringing that up as one of the challenges of scaling a solar company from the Nordics to the rest of Europe, because people might question why would a solar company do well in the Nordics, because we have this seasonal variation and we don't have a lot of sun during the winter. But at the same time, that argument can easily be turned around, like you just did. And if we can make it here in the Nordics, we can of course make it in the rest of Europe too. So it's actually a strength to show that this is definitely a viable business. It will be viable without all of the subsidies that we see today as well, although the subsidies are helping us to do things faster, as we just spoke about. So it's more of a strength to show that it's doable here. But one thing that helps is really that, I mean, both in developing and also adapting the different clean tech solutions, is that we have a tech savvy population here in the Nordics. We have tuition-free education, we have the tech talent, etc. So we develop and we adapt these new and sustainable solutions faster than some other countries.
Mm-hmm. Markku, you're nodding your head very enthusiastically there. Do you have something to add?
Yeah, I think that the kind of this kind of perception about, for example, the solar. I think that like in the most of Sweden, a quite big portion of Norway, and then southern part of Finland, we have actually the same amount of sunshine as we have, let's say, in Poland or northern parts of Germany. It's just distributed a little bit differently. But then also we have a, let's say, ample amount of land. So I would say that we are actually one of the most competitive locations in the Nordic or in Europe even to build the solar. It's just kind of said that, and then kind of like Olivia mentioned, that this tech savvy and very competitive markets we have had on the electricity and the digitalization, connectivity know-how. So there's plenty of startup communities and exactly kind of building and this kind of getting consumers involved into this development, and also the data privacy, data security, what we value a lot here in the Nordics. So all that kind of builds this kind of what the colleagues were mentioning, the kind of trusted community, trusted nations type approach, and that I think enables then us to scale also the solutions forward.
Mm-hmm. And along the same lines, Kristine, do you think if Norway can have such a high percentage of electric vehicles, can other countries, follow them, do the same thing? What's holding them back? And, you mentioned before, actually 90%, you still got a long way to go, but still quite a lot ahead of other countries. But yeah, do you think, why can't other countries do it, or can they?
As for Norway, the change is quite rapid. So a lot more EVs are sold than fossil cars in Norway. And for other countries to get there, I think what you need is renewable energy, and you need more energy, which is of course an issue, and you need more of the old-fashioned renewable electricity in addition to sort of solar and other stuff. And you need more grid capacity, both to achieve emission targets as a whole, but of course you need the grid capacity to be able to charge EV infrastructure. And of course, in Norway, we have a stronger grid than in many other countries. But even so, if you charge your EVs smart, for instance, during night instead of during day, I think the grid in most countries will be able to do so. So definitely, yes. I think EVs are becoming mature. It's a technology that works, and in the same way as in solar, if it works in the Nordics, where it has to work in 20 degrees below zero, you can sort of be sure it works in other countries as well, since batteries are not working as well in cold climates. So definitely, the EVs are here. The grid could be used smart, and we all need more renewable energy to achieve climate targets. That goes also for the Nordics, even though we have a high percentage of clean energy, but to electrify existing industry and building new industry, electrifying transport, we definitely need a lot more renewable energy and grid capacity and better utilization of the grid capacity that we already have.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Kristine. And continuing on from that, we've kind of briefly talked about it, but to what extent is geography a factor? For example, Norway has a lot of hydropower, which is fairly stable and predictable. Is that an unfair advantage, would you say?
Fair or unfair, it's an advantage. So I don't know how to answer that. It's an advantage. It's because you could say that it used to be a disadvantage because with hydropower you depend on weather, as you do with wind and solar today. And as Markku also mentioned, we have a very harsh climate. Some years are extremely cold, some years are a bit less cold, and we have wet and dry years. So for Norway, we could have a year that's very dry and also very cold. So we have had the risk of lacking energy with the dry and cold years. So to that extent, we have had a more challenging system to begin with compared to other countries who had nuclear power or thermal capacities. That's very independent on the weather. As we also use electricity for heating, that's been an issue in Norway. So I think that has this harsh environment and dependence on the weather has been helping us to sort of get an efficient system based on the resources that we have. But as for now, when everyone's having a renewable system, we have an easy renewable system compared to a system mainly based on wind and solar, where the variations are more often and can be quite large and unpredictable.
Mm-hmm.
So if I could jump in here.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So and here comes the EV as a major player. We need to see the EV not as a load on the grid, but an asset to the grid. We can use the EVs to do load shift. Soon we can actually use the battery of the EV to reinforce the grid locally, store the excess power from a sunny, windy day. So the key to the EV revolution is actually use the whole asset of an EV. And that's where I think we can solve many more challenges also for the grid and other countries that is not so far ahead as Norway or Sweden for that, and Finland for that matter. But then we come back to the biggest elephant in the room, regulations. This needs to be regulated in a proper way so that we can have a rollout. The technology is there, but the regulation is at TRL 2 level, but the technology is at TRL 9.
I can answer that briefly, touching on both the geography, the hydro dependency, and the EVs. So I have an anecdote from the Swedish situation. In 2018, there was a very severe drought, worse than actually what happened this year. And the transmission system operator in Sweden, who's almost previously fully dependent on hydro resources for balancing the grid, instead were desperate to bring in new technology. And this is the positive feedback loops that then exist because EVs were starting to become prolific throughout the grid, and they were actually quite open compared to a few years before that, when they had plenty of water and they didn't need the help, quite open to allow new technology to come in. And therefore, players like Tibber have since become accepted to provide, for example, frequency containment reserve through wall boxes, and EVs are an asset to the grid today. And therefore, also bringing in end users to play an active role in this transition, which is something that needs to happen if we're going to be successful.
Yeah, and may also jump into a couple of comments. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think maybe a little bit kind of to what Kristine mentioned, that kind of charging the EV in the night. I think we start actually seeing the paradigm shift, because what Kristine, you mentioned, that kind of assumption is that the consumption is kind of driving. But I think we start now actually seeing that it's a production. So that we had maybe about a month ago, let's say, exceptionally good wind conditions. And that drove the pricing practically to zero on the electricity. We had a really big surplus. We were transporting then the electricity to our friends in Estonia and further out. So this kind of like the fluctuations, and then obviously that what the colleagues were mentioned, the storage solutions. So this is about the integration, the whole energy system. But this also means that we need to be able to educate then the consumers. And therefore comes what some of the colleagues are providing, this, let's say, solutions for the consumers to also be the smart on this. And then obviously how the sizable industries also operate in these kind of increasingly, let's say, fluctuating situations. So, and again, the benefit is that we are part of the bigger energy system together, so that with that one we can kind of balance then the fluctuations. But just a few notes and observations. So in that sense, we saw the future about a month ago, how this might be actually shaping out into the future.
Thanks, Markku. If we look from a Central European perspective, as this panel is called Follow the Leader, the Nordics often pose as a role model. So from within, what do you think are the biggest challenges or deficits in the Central European region? Maybe starting with Olivia.
Yeah, I mean, coming back to one thing that I mentioned several times before, is that there are, different regulations in different markets. And there are, in Central Europe, you have many countries on a quite small area, compared to the Nordics, where we have fewer countries on a large area. So also having, you have energy systems in Central Europe, they're dependent on each other, but you have different regulations that are driving different behaviors and needs in the different markets. And that makes it very difficult to build thriving business models that will work today and in the future, and that can be scaled between countries. So I think that is the biggest challenge, I would say. And then one other challenge is, of course, we don't have the access to hydropower, etc., like we do have, and biomass that we do have in the Nordics. But at the same time, we are integrating our energy systems. The Nordics is being connected to the rest of Europe as well. So it's really about collaborating with each other, building one sustainable energy system together. And there, I think there's a lot for Central Europe to learn from the Nordics. We have been talking a lot about the collaboration, having joint electricity markets, etc., building energy systems that are connected and helping each other, optimizing the production and the consumption of energy.
Thanks, Olivia. And if we flip that, actually, obviously the Nordics are leaders, but they're not perfect, as we have also learnt in the last 45 minutes. But so Jacob, what do you think are the weaknesses to the Nordic systems and how could they be improved?
Oh, hard question. May I just add one statement to the Central Europe or the pan-European one? And the fundament is data. So smart meter rollout is just a very simple blocker in many of those countries, including Germany. That doesn't exist. So without that, you can't bring along the end user. You can't have flexible tariffs. You can't have a flexible system. Challenges or weaknesses of the Nordics. It's tough. When compared to Europe, it's very hard to say if we have anything on the top of my head. Someone needs to save me here.
I mean, the availability of sun and the hours of sun during the year. I mean, there is definitely an advantage of maybe than Southern Europe more rather than Central Europe compared to the Nordics. So there is less variability in the hours of sun. So that is definitely a challenge. But at the same time, for the Nordics, but at the same time, one thing that maybe everyone knows, or maybe you don't, but is that there's negative correlation between wind and solar. So often when it's windy, it's less sunny, and when it's sunny, it's usually not as much wind. So that is something that is helping the Nordics still. It's balancing wind and solar that we have quite a lot of, especially on the wind side, and now accelerating solar power as well.
Can I?
Sorry,
please.
I could say from a Norwegian perspective then, maybe our biggest challenge is also our biggest asset, that we're so dependent on hydro. So this year it was dry. It was super dry, and the only places there were wet was in the north, and we had no transmission going down. So having so much of our power production linked to one type of asset is a risk. Not a risk that happens a lot, but we especially seeing this year with extreme drought, war in Ukraine, and basically, even though Norway has a lot of oil and gas, we have one power plant or two power plants that does gas. So when, excuse my French, but shit hits the fan, then we are very dependent on our neighbors and their power system. And if they also have a challenge, yes, then we have a challenge. So for us, being connected to Central Europe and have a more holistic approach to the grids and other power sources would have been a benefit for us, which Central Europe maybe is a bit better for, even though you're closing down nuclear power plants and cutting off coal and all these things. It's still a larger network that could be connected together from a larger variety of power sources.
Yeah, exactly. And on top of that, it's also the Nordic grid is quite long and thin related to Europe, you would say, with sparse populations in the north. So there's large challenges in transporting power from the north to the south in both Norway and Sweden and somewhat in Finland, although Germany has those challenges as well. So that's related to Asmund's point.
Mm-hmm. I've had a question from the audience. How much is a lack of public support, particularly in the area of not in my backyard? So people wanting renewables, but not wanting them directly affecting their lives. How much is this a problem in the Nordics? If anyone wants to jump in.
I could say that this is a very huge problem. Nobody wants the monster masts for the transmission. Nobody wants the windmills close to themselves. Everybody wants green energy, but nobody wants the power plant. So NIMBAR is a very known problem, and unfortunately, people don't see the correlation between actually producing power and getting power.
Yeah.
I personally think windmills looks great, so I don't mind them, but I know a very little percentage of the population that does that.
And how do we overcome that? Is it education?
Markku?
Yeah, may I think that we have a little bit different situation actually here in Finland, that there's a very high support for wind power. And that's why we are seeing also the projects, let's say, proceeding, let's say, as mentioned, very significant amount. And one obviously it has taken education, teams, communities, they need to see the big picture, but then also that there is a financial model that communities, they get tax revenue on the property taxes, landowners, they get the lease payments. And this is actually in some communities that it's a couple of percentages of the community tax, what these wind power projects are bringing in. So we are having actually really good acceptance on these ones. But then at the same time, we need to be really careful that we follow all the environmental regulation, the permitting, sustainability, the topics, and we follow those. And I think that's what we, across the Europe, we need to look together, that how do we speed up the permitting process, and that we should not do that so that we relax the requirements, but have it kind of more consistently done, because like I think Jacob was the one that said that we need to build this in scale. And that's something that's where we need to address, is that how do we kind of speed up the investment decisions, but at the same time do not compromise on the environmental requirements.
Yeah, and I can add that we are noticing a mindset shift in the solar industry, because actually if you do care about supporting the shift towards renewable energy, then solar power is the only way of showing that you as an individual is supporting that shift. If you have a villa and you're installing solar panels, and that is actually something that you can show your neighbors, you can show the world that you're supporting that shift. You can of course co-invest in wind power and so on, but that is hard to show that you have done. So we are noticing that this is something that customers are becoming more and more proud of, that they can show that they are part of the whole shift towards renewable energy.
Can add very briefly, no one's mentioned yet the unfortunate, horrible situation in Europe right now, and it's depressing and devastating that it's taken a war for this situation to manifest. But it's in fact an immense opportunity for Europe and the world right now to put the foot on the pedal and accelerate this, and that needs to happen by bringing the customers along and bringing the end user along and actually enabling and empowering them to take a part in this transition.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jacob. We've had another question from the audience asking about bureaucratic barriers and what they're like in the Nordics, because in Germany, for example, it can take up to 5 years or even longer to have a wind turbine approved and built. How is it in your experience? Maybe Kristine, would you be able to answer that?
Yeah, definitely. In Norway, at least, I don't know that much about Sweden and Finland, but of course, these bureaucratic processes takes a lot of time. So for wind power, it would be, I guess, 8 to 10 years, but now they're all on hold almost because of the resistance. And we're still waiting for the offshore wind farms, but the regulations are not ready for them, so they will not be built until after 2030. And also for grid concessions, it would take 3 to 12 years to build a grid on the 132 voltage level, so on kilowatt volts level. So it definitely takes a lot of time, and some of you mentioned this. Some of these processes are also needed, sort of to take care of democracy and all of those people and companies that are nearby these new assets. So some of it is needed, but it seems like the processes are definitely too long. But based on what I know in Germany, they are a bit smoother still than what you can see in Germany.
Yeah, I think it's also actually relevant to what Jacob just mentioned about certain situations. force us to do things a bit more quickly. And with new regulation like Repower EU, it shows that we can do it if we have the pressure. And unfortunately, crisis kind of does bring opportunity in a way. So yeah, I think that's definitely kind of a way to connect those points.
Yeah, because there is no incentives to change when it's working. So, or at least very few incentives, but when we have external pressure, then we also need to see, we see the incentives to actually optimize.
Yeah, absolutely. So we only have a few minutes left. I just want to close by maybe asking each of you, what's one main lesson that we can take away from the Nordics that other countries could copy easily? What is your kind of one main takeaway? Maybe starting with Markku.
Teamwork.
Short and simple. Love it. Kristine?
Well, one takeaway from the Nordics would be e-mobility is possible. So one thing is the personal cars, but we also electrify ferries, which has a lot more power when charging than EVs. And of course, buses and public transport, but it's possible.
Yeah. Asmund?
I would say one of the key learnings is look at what you have and how you can connect the dots or the building blocks in a different way to have a better result.
Olivia?
Long-term strategies and making sure to support development and adoption as fast and as stable as possible.
Thanks. And Jacob?
High penetration renewable grid is possible, or proven, in fact. And yeah, we have the toolbox, not in theory, but in practice. It's happening today.
Great. Well, that brings us to the end of the session. Thank you all so much. It was really interesting discussion. Thank you all for jumping in, contributing so much, answering a lot of questions on the fly. We really appreciate that. And yeah, just mention again that we will upload the session to YouTube after gridXdays is done, so anyone can watch back on the session. But yeah, thanks again, and I hope you'll have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
So we'll be back in 2 minutes talking about leaving no one behind, how we can enable sustainable solutions for all.